This was not the video I was expecting to make, ever. But yeah, I'm out. This will be my last Helluva Boss video, and it feels freeing to say. It's bittersweet, and hell yeah, I'm afraid for this channel going forward. However, upon reflection, I think being a content creator has actively ruined my relationship to Helluva Boss, and having seen Mastermind in the finale, I think I've arrived at a place where I'm ready to let the show go, as I'm not vibing with it anymore, and rather than ghosting y'all, or making a community post, I figured I'd do one last vid to better explain how it's come to this, plus my parting thoughts on Season 2 as a whole, and yeah. That'll be it. And yes, the irony that I, the original Stolitz fanboy YouTuber, am dropping the show right after the ship got confirmed is, yeah, that's not lost on me. So context, I have been talking about Helluva Boss for nearly 4 years. I have been a fan of the show since a pilot, which blew me away from a production comedic standpoint, but it took me a while to actually start talking about the show, with my first review for Cherubs inexplicably blowing up. Though my long-standing theory was always that it wasn't the review, I didn't say like the deepest things, it was probably just a combo of loreheads really wanting to hear about how heaven was corrupt, as Hazbin hadn't come out yet, and that was straight up confirmed immediately, but also blew up because the engagement for it was insane, because every single gun nut COD player just couldn't resist correcting me on how this wasn't an AK. It was a throwaway line, guys. I didn't bother to look it up, it was there. But that was just my first foray. The video that really set the tone and changed like the course of my career was my explaining Stolitz one, which pre-dork was just a concept, a hypothetical, toxic overtones and all. This video is what truly changed my career, as I went from doing sarcastic summaries and reviews to discussing other ships, which is something that I low-key have always been doing. I mean, this is how I opened the first video of mine that ever gained traction.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes!
Spoilers. Frankly, this has always been my vibe, I just wasn't ready to commit to the bit yet. But yes, I did this video, lives are changed, and I started talking about Helluva Boss. A lot. Pulling all-nighters to get the reviews out the next day, then taking a page out of Cartoon Universe's playbook by making other videos about my other takes on the show, the events, the controversies, with it being a pretty sweet gig, all things considered. I got to talk about the show that I really liked and get paid for it. Like, that is every fanboy's dream. Yes, the clickbait was awful, but let's be honest, it worked, and by some miracle I was able to remain relevant as the series kept going, which I've always felt very fortunate for considering just how many other channels fell off. Though I do think part of that is just how insanely quick other reviewers just turned on Helluva Boss. Channels went from declaring the show amazing, perfect, to calling it glorified fanfiction in the most disparaging ways possible. After one episode.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Season 2's premiere had former fans fighting to be known as this show's #1 hater. And I didn't get it. Truly, while not blown away by the premiere and surprised by just how much the show was giving Stolitz the Whoopi treatment, turning Stolitz and Blitz into childhood friends was a wee bit out of nowhere based on what we saw from Season 1, but I still liked the episode as it was a good time and I wanted to see where the story was going to go with this. Meanwhile, I felt like some other ladies and gentlemen were throwing excessive shade to get ahead of some Steven Universe style backlash that they could ride to greater popularity. Did I always have the best takes? Fuck no. Do I still stand by a lot of them? Yeah. Though I do fully cop to how I often feel like I have an issue adequately explaining what I'm trying to say, but that is a skill issue, so it's still on me. However, as the show kept going, things did start to change for me. It was still fun with great moments, but a slight tinge of disappointment at some of the choices just kept creeping in, with my first real conflict with the show and the nature of my relationship to it coming with unhappy campers. I hated this episode, like flat out. I finished it and was in shock just by how much I didn't like it. From the comedy to the characterization, just how haphazardly the Barbie Wire storyline was tacked onto it. So I was ready to rip this thing a new asshole, but then I stopped myself as I suddenly felt torn between my initial gut reaction and my brand as a YouTuber. Where for sure I have talked a lot of shit, but I always aspire at least try to be fair. I never want to be the guy name dropping the the writers and blaming them for everything that is wrong with this show, as that felt like too close to a personal attack and a fandom already overstuffed with them. So the idea of me just becoming another hater it didn't sit right with me. I talked with friends who called it their personal fave, so I started to think that it just might be a me thing. So I decided to be nice, giving the episode in the moment and in hindsight too much grace, coming up with justifications for the choices that semi-track but in execution I thought didn't work or didn't achieve the desired effect / justified its own inclusion. And I've always regretted that, compromising my analysis for the sake of my brand, especially since it would be for fucking nothing. At this point, I was already going beyond simple reviews and ship analysis videos, 1 or 2 vids, that feels fine to me per episode, but now I was pressuring myself to make as many videos as possible, have as many hot takes that were frequently more mellow than the thumbnails made them out to be, but again, clicks. But this desire to maximize what I could get out of every episode of Helluva Boss, which led to me feeling like my whole relationship with Helluva Boss was increasingly parasitic, which it always has been, but the shame was starting to creep in. And I took some pride in that I was at least semi-self-aware enough to know this, insert BoJack clip.
But I know I'm a piece of shit. That at least makes me better than all the pieces of shit who don't know they're pieces of shit. Or is it worse?
Increasingly, talking about Helluva Boss felt like a chore. I was forcing myself to talk about each episode even when I didn't have much to say. Sometimes an episode has issues, but it's fine. Not every episode needs to be a conversation, but there I was having them. This is not to say that I lied or made up these critiques. Outside of unhappy campers, I always try to be honest. If I said something was an issue, it was because I genuinely believed that it was. But I still think my low point here was definitely Has-Been Hotel, where I wanted the coin so badly, even though it was January, the worst month for YouTubers. So I literally worked twice as hard for half the pay. With me rushing to bring shit that even if it wasn't true, I would never bring it up if I was talking about the show to a friend, like the janky camera movement in the premiere. I made a video a few months before Has-Been came out talking about the reaction I was afraid the show would garner from its hatedom, only to do a lot of those things. I still stand by a lot of my critiques, but I wouldn't have made that premise video if I wasn't a YouTuber. I would have thought it strange in how it raises weird questions about Charlie's motivations that just didn't have to be there if they cut it, but if not for the job I would have written a Reddit post and moved on. However, the whole affair just left me with a growing dissatisfaction with the kinds of videos I was making and the ways I engage with media, especially with the ones from the Helluverse. Though that is not to say that these shows are above reproach.
Well, howdy,
Shut up!
Yeah, I can't leave you guys without getting my final thoughts on Helluva Boss Season 2, and it's complicated. I think the greatest joy I got out of Mastermind and Sinsmas wasn't the dance. It's that the cherubs and Dork don't come back. So I got to feel a sick validation how just I could finally say 100% that Full Moon was a miss. Like Season 2 spent half the series building up to it, only for the majority of the episode to be about the fucking cherubs, with no thematic relevance to the actual focus of the story, instead existing solely to fill time, as otherwise this episode would be 5 minutes long. Overall, I think Season 2 has been okay, with some great moments, but I think this series has a real issue with connecting those moments together, with the show often banking on people saying something tracks versus taking the time to set it up in the story. This is Imp, who shows unwavering faith to Blitz 90% of the time just showing up to fight the cherubs, or Andrelphus's whole stupid-ass plan hinging on Stolas watching TV at the same time. Something we've seen him do once before, but not something the series set up in this episode to make it feel like it was the smarter choice versus just accusing Stolas of negligence. This is basically episode 3 of Has-Been Hotel and Vaggie, where new watchers have had zero time to get to know who she is, so her lamenting how protecting Charlie is her only purpose rings hollow, as we haven't had the time to establish who Vaggie is as a person. Has-Been, though, has the excuse of being picked up by A24, with its original plan of 12 episodes getting cut down to 8. But Helluva Boss is fully independent and free to not have those same time constraints. So with full control over its own story, it still chooses to not take a breath, have Stella say Stolas is bummed, and watches TV all day, to have the office share one worried look as Blitz leaves to foreshadow that they might follow him later. I bring this up as it's an issue Helluva Boss has always had. This show's love of big emotional moments and jokes means it often struggles to fully connect or set up all those ideas as well as it could, with there often being an expectation that people will get the vibe or impression and can assume the rest rather than taking that extra time to show show us. There are people who watched season 1 and were blindsided that Stolas had actual feelings for Blitz, and as someone who shipped them, I get that. Also, I think Stolas being the focus of the show was a mistake.
Oh, the deception! The betrayal, man, you deceived me!
Truth off my chest, I wanted to do a video centered around the question of whether or not Helluva Boss abandoned its premise. This was a common complaint against the show for most of season 2, as the antics of Imp were replaced by personal drama and Stolas. Personally, I think my take has changed as the series goes on, from denial to, yeah. It did. The previous use of hit-based shenanigans get replaced with a greater focus on the titular Helluva Boss and his backstory, something that was brought up in season 1 but has come to dominate the plot with a speed that never left enough cushion to make this transition feel more subtle like it does in other shows. It's also way more noticeable here, as in something like The Owl House, where the wants of the characters change and therefore the focus of the series, season 2 immediately elevates Stolas to the spot of the second main character, with us getting to see his full childhood and all of his wants and needs, with that making this shift all the more obvious, especially since the actual job of IMP doesn't become relevant or drive the story till arguably episode 3, but it's not until episode 5 that we see the M&Ms actually go and try and kill anyone. This all makes the show's change in focus pretty obvious, and while it was a choice that was doomed to annoy some people, as any big shift will, I am personally of the opinion that shifting the story to focus on Stolas isn't a bad thing in itself. Plenty of shows work by being centered around the messy personal lives of its main characters. No, the real issue here is the writing, as you can't center a story around the flaws of its main characters, then refuse to meaningfully engage with those flaws. Let me explain. Helluva Boss has this habit for most of season 2 that I was able to clock fairly early on, but are at their absolute worst in Mastermind and Sinsmas, where the story will take the actually interesting flaws and mistakes of its characters, then strip away the nuance, like in the case of Stolas cheating on Stella, as now it's just completely valid given how she is and always has been a monster, or Blitz's beef and rivalry with Fizz, turning out to be based on a misunderstanding. We get opportunities to explore the flaws and mistakes of the characters, only for the story to pick the least challenging option possible so the two never look too bad. Then, when criticism is presented, the story more often than not undercuts or makes a person critiquing them have one thing that makes them feel like they're being off base. Andrelphus is evil and accuses Blitz of the only crimes he didn't commit against Hell. Millie criticizes Blitz's choice to not finish a hit even though it's functionally identical to the one we saw at the very first episode, only for Blitz to say no, as he sees himself in them, with Millie disagreements getting couched in the fact that she's suffering mood swings because she's pregnant, pulling focus from that valid critique and putting the idea into the audience's head that her being galled by Blitz's decision isn't due to her personal reservations or morals. No, she's preggers and emotionally volatile. Or how Via calls Stolas out only for the story to have done everything it could to soften the blow to his image, from turning the trial into a split-second heroic sacrifice to the addition of this line.
And you needed these! Was this my fault that you needed these?
No!
Which, while in character for a teenager, to me this fits his pattern of softening, where rather than sitting with the critique of Stolas' character, the audience, and Stolas, are now hung up on the melodrama of Via jumping to conclusions. Plus, what put them into this situation wasn't Stolas suffering the consequences of his actions. This isn't the culmination of Stolas' neglect of Via. It's not Stolas being held accountable for the actions he's displayed the entire series. Instead, it's him getting held accountable for performing a heroic sacrifice, which paints Stolas in an objectively more sympathetic light and distracts from what should be the core tragedy here, which is the actual flaws of the characters and how they screw them over. The characters critiquing Stolas and Blitz outside Vraska are either evil racists or have their opinions explained away as being a result of some other factor outside of their control. This all contributes to a sense that Blitz and Stolas are just too precious, they made some mistakes, and what flaws they do have, well, it's always going to be put in the most positive of lights. Then, even when they do manage to draw attention to a character's flaws and grill them on it, like Blitz and Apology Tour, the story, with the exception of 2 lines in a song, will ignore Stolas' issues to keep hammering home on Blitz's, on top of making him the problem in his failed relationship to Vraska, where previously they're implied to be mutually toxic, which touches on another issue where the story keeps hinting at nuance, only to choose the most simplistic angle possible. Blitz and Stolas can absolutely work as the leads of this story, but I think for my personal taste, I think the story loses me in how it wants to have it all. To have the big emotional moments, a social commentary, unpacking all this trauma, then be a comedy that switches between jokes to abuse on a dime, the feels are there. But I'd argue that some of these big emotional scenes feel low-key manipulative, since they don't really have the scaffolding to help them stand on their own. I think for me, the story just failed to convince me that it wasn't biting off more than it could chew, and that focusing the story around Stolitz was a miss since the story never takes the time to fully engage with the flaws that are supposedly driving the story. With the worst example of this being Mastermind, which honestly pissed me off in what a missed opportunity it was, as the choice to not base a trial around the actual crimes of Blitz and Stolas was a massive L. Instead, we got a convoluted evil plan where Blitz gets accused of assault. We get a hollow "the system is rigged" speech, all while half the people who run the system get played off as goofy good guys or a haha, Satan just wants lunch. To borrow a point a friend made to me while we were talking about this, there's such a compelling story to tell about Blitz committing crimes as a way to crawl out of the situation he was born into. And for those who made the rules criticizing him for it, possibly framing it as selfishness, something real-world oppressed groups have to go through, and this could have made Stolas stepping up to defend Blitz all the more impactful, as it would be him actually acknowledging the hypocrisies of the system on top of his own mistakes and treatment of Blitz. This would have been a true sacrifice, a culmination of all the world building and setup over the course of the series, versus Stolas just declaring himself the bad guy with nobody questioning it. As at the end of the day, the story just wants to focus on the melodrama of Stolas singing his heart out, Blitz realizing he loves Stolas back, with all the issues that kept them apart, the things that I first found actually interesting about their relationship, the power imbalance, the lack of self-awareness on both their parts, and their inability to communicate, all that gets traded away for a song, which is an exchange that I personally don't fuck with. And by the end of the season, I low-key wish the story had just ended with Stolas and Blitz being sad together on that couch. But no, the story wants to give one last squee moment for the fans and has them dance outside with us needing a hug where Stolas doesn't hug Blitz back to remind us that, yeah, he did just lose his daughter today. But fuck that, look at the ship, which, nah, this didn't feel earned to me. It's like Mastermind wanting heartfelt music at the end despite Stolas having just lost his daughter for the first time, and didn't decide to try and call her immediately because we need Via's beef in the next episode to track. I don't like describing stories as feeling like fan fiction, as all fiction is fiction, but my personal take on the series' writing is that Helluva Boss has an impulse control problem. That it wants to do all the things, give all the moments, even if when they're stacked together, they're to the story's detriment. Like Stolas beating Andrelphus' ass was, yeah, that's cheer-worthy, but seeing as he just got his ass beat by a posh soft boy who's never worked a day in his life, I'm not gonna take Andrelphus seriously after such a fat L, even if the animation is amazing. This issue is all over the series, but to throw out just my pettiest example, Visago shouldn't exist.
I am about to explain everything in the only way I know how. Song! Yes! Yes! Cántalo, baby!
Visago's love of Stolas annoys me. This series beats us over the head with how miserable and isolated Stolas was. How Via was the only good thing he had in his life, only for them to throw in this random supportive friend out of nowhere, muddying the information we already have for just a bit. A fun character, but one whose role in the story speaking up for Stolas would have been better filled by Asmodeus, as we spent 2 whole episodes on this man and his relationship to an imp, so for him to just do the bare minimum in these scenes felt off given how much we've already invested our time into him. And speaking of time, one of the most common defenses this show gets is that X issue of the show just needs more time. That people are too impatient and need to wait for the show to basically finish, as said issues will hypothetically be addressed in the future, which I get this defense. This show is on an irregular schedule, independently animated, yet it keeps getting visually better every year. This makes it make sense why people want to give the story time to address what it wants to address. However, a lot of the things that people were jumping season 2's premiere for were still issues by the end of the season. Stolas getting whoobied, repetitive character beats, tonal whiplashes that miss just as often as they hit, etc., etc. There able to get to some things sometimes, like Millie getting fleshed out, and I don't think a show should waste time trying to respond to every critic. However, I do think there is a distinction between not giving a show enough time to cook and questioning how it spends its time to the detriment of other parts of the story. So I don't fault a lot of people who have issues with how Helluva Boss handles certain topics, with the promise that they might later not being a very convincing argument in the moment or really ever. This fandom is hyperbolic to say the least. The haters are some of the worst I have ever seen. The hyper defenders would defend anything, with everything in between getting weaponized by one side or the other. I mean, adjacent, but this is, let's be honest, this is the same fandom. I watched some people go to war over one video a few months back from a victim of SA and how they didn't like how Angel Dust was handled. And while I disagree with some of their points, I don't think the fact that they have that opinion is a problem, and there could be a conversation of how the show's execution might have led someone to having that take. But there wasn't one. And with how social media is gamified, there never will be. That said though, I don't want anyone to think I'm quitting because of the fandom. I've had shockingly few death threats, and most importantly, I think all opinions on media are valid, even if they're held by assholes. No, the real reason, the thing that's driven me to this point is that I still want to like this show. Flawed as hell, I still have fun watching it, but having made the way I publicly engage with Helluva Boss being through criticism has actively deteriorated the way I view the show. Millions of people like this thing. If the Wayback Machine and this one dude on Reddit are correct, the show's fandom has remained pretty consistent over its lifetime. But personally, I'm tired. I'm tired of having to engage with the show the way that I have. These moments I could take and enjoy now need to be broken apart and monetized again and again and again. And while I'm not gonna stop doing reviews and ship analysis for other shows, I think with the end of season 2, where in spite of the moments that I liked, the ship I've dedicated hours upon hours just talking about finally getting made canon, my only real takeaway was ambivalence. And that's a bummer. So I sat down and failed to write a review. The second time this has happened since I just hit a wall with Mastermind. And it was there just sitting at that table that it occurred to me that maybe Helluva Boss isn't for me anymore. It's amazing that so many people are happy with Helluva Boss and it's giving them everything that they want, but personally, I'm not vibing with it like I used to. That what the show wants to be and what I want out of it are just becoming two completely different things. That certain aspects that seem so rich with potential just will remain surface level. That reviewing the show for years with just the criticalist of lenses has made so that the flaws stick with me way more than the good, and I feel like a broken record talking about them. So with all that swirling around in my head the day after the episode dropped, talking with friends who ranged from it was fine to pissed, I think it finally hit me that I just might need to walk away from Helluva Boss. If I'm not vibing with it, it feels like a chore writing about, then I think it's time to stop. If I kept going the way that I am, I'll probably end up hating the show and how I talk about it. So for all these reasons and more, I've decided that this is going to be my last time discussing Helluva Boss, and probably Has Been Hotel for the foreseeable future. I wish Helluva Boss and Spindlehorse all the best, even with all the things that it's done that are worthy of critique, but I won't be the one making them. I'll be forever thankful to this show and to all of you who tuned in to hear me bitch and squee about Helluva Boss and Stolitz. Your support has meant the world to me. I hope y'all keep watching the show and keep following me on this strange YouTuber journey I've stumbled into. But, you know, sometimes you just gotta walk away.